Hey, good evening, everybody. It is So Real here for the SHILD Squad. This is going to be the last pure myth of the night. If you guys been following us through the certain links I've been putting out on Facebook, you've been seeing it. We've been doing quite a few pure myths, videos and things. But this one is going to be the last one of the night, and so. Without further ado, I bring to you pure myths Black Hebrew Israelites must abandon. And this time it is going to be myth number 7. Myth number 7 pretty much go along the lines of something like the book of Revelation records John describing the race of Jesus. Yes, this is what not just Black Hebrew Israelites believe, but this is what, just other groups believe, even certain atheistic conscious groups. But the question is, does John describe the race of Jesus or the transfigured, glorified Jesus? That's the thing that you have to end up asking yourself. There are two types of Jesuses that people end up liking to find in the Bible. And what we have to ask is that when John the Revelator, who wrote the book of Revelation, begins to describe what he's seeing before him, is he emphasizing the race of Jesus, or is he emphasizing the attributes, the glorified, transfigured attributes of Jesus? And some people would try to say and bridge the gap between both. They would try to say, well, yes, he's emphasizing the glorified, transfigured Jesus. However, the implications of that, or the byproduct of that, it just happens to be the race of Jesus. People try to say, oh, it's inseparable. Well, I'm here to try to give you guys a different, more contextual, biblical way of looking at things. Once again, the Jews, they wrote in the Greek. And a lot of times when people write in those ways, they're saying very specific things. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started just on that note. Now, if you actually look at unpolished brass, that's what it looks like on the left. Polished brass looks like what you have on the right. This is a term that's basically in the New Testament, polished brass. And it's also in the Old Testament as well, but that's basically what it looks like, right? This is another image of polished brass when you shine it to its highest form, or at least you try. This is what polished brass looks like. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and draw from Revelation chapter 1, verses 14 and 15, using different kinds of translations. Now, of course, my eSword is a little advanced. And so what you have here is the MLV. That's a modern literal translation. You have the English Standard Version. You have the Exegesis Companion Bible. You have the easy to read version. That's one of my favorites. I love the easy to read version. You have the Lamsa New Testament. I believe that's the Aramaic, right? Or that's the Peshitta. You also have the Apostolic Polyglot. That is a heavy Greek Old and New Testament. It's kind of like an interlinear for the Septuagint with the New Testament compatibility. Then you have the original Aramaic New Testament with the Psalms and Proverbs, and also you have the Lexham English Bible. These are the 7 translations that I will be using. Actually, it's 8 translations. And if you look, it describes different ways about polished brass. So, for example, the MLV, it says polished brass, right? The ESV says burnished bronze. People think burnished means burned. No, if you actually look up what burnished means, it actually means something like burning fire. And you'll see that in other translations. Also, what you have is brilliant copper fired in a furnace. That's the Exegesis Companion Bible. Now, the ERV makes it really clear. It just says, his feet were like black brass that glows hot in a furnace. Notice it that glows hot, right? Polished brass, burnished bronze, copper fired in a furnace. Then all of a sudden you have fine brass of Lebanon. So now it's getting into more of the historically contextual meaning of what that would mean. What kind of brass? Brass from Lebanon. Why? Because Lebanon is very famous for known for its kind of, brass that has that, right? Also, you have his feet were likened unto fine brass, as in a furnace being with fire. And of course, you do have what? The form of brass of Lebanon. That's the same thing that the ISV at the bottom says, the International Standard Version. I like that one too. It draws some very early manuscripts. It says glowing bronze refined in a furnace, right? So it takes a whole bunch of words that you could find in different translations. And last but not least, you have the Lexham English, and it says, and his feet were like fine bronze when it has been fired in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of many waters. So you can already see that this is the reason why they're using these words this way. It has a lot to do with glowing, polished, fine brass, fiery, hot, bright, burning brass. That's literally what you're having. And so this is John the Revelator, and he's speaking about Jesus in his glorified state. Now, of course, you can look at this in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 7. You'll find something very similar because it's talking about, the Son of Man again. Look at this. Now, this one's talking about the certain angels, and these angels basically had the same kind of, features. Look at this. It says, and their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished brass, right? ESV says they sparkled like burnished bronze. Another one says they sparkled as the eye of burnished copper. Or, and they sparkled like polished brass. Or they were sparks as flashing brass, and were light their wings. And of course you have, and they were sparkling like the outward appearance of polished bronze. So the ISV says calves hooves, but they gleamed like polished bronze. So you can see that it has a lot to do with fire and light. The emphasis is fire and light, not skin color and flesh. That's not the emphasis. You can even look here. This goes with, I believe, Daniel chapter 10, verse 6. And it's once again the same thing. And his body was like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as flaming torches. Now, once again, it says, look, his face as the appearance of lightning. What did John the Revelator and Peter see when Jesus took them upon a high mountain? They said his face shone like the sun. He became transfigured. And, the KJV, the King James says he was like, whiter than fuller. Fuller is actually the word that we would use for bleach today. But you go ahead and compare that to what it says in Revelation chapter 1, verses 14, 15, and 16. It says in Revelation chapter 1, verse 14 or 15, it says his head and his hair were white like wool. His head, that means his whole head, right? That means, whatever is shining, it was white like wool. If your skin is white like wool, that means that you're shining. That's why in Daniel chapter 10, verse 6 here, it says his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as flaming torches, and his arms and his feet like burnished brass, right? And the voice of his words were like the voice of a multitude. Look what the other translation says. His face had the appearance of lightning, and his legs like a gleam of burnished bronze. I'm going to stick on the bronze because I think the lightning is very obvious. His feet as the eye of burnished copper. Notice it said the eye of burnished copper, right? In other words, the center, right? Have you ever seen the center of something hot? It's barely yellow. It's always white, like light. His arms and feet were shiny, like polished brass. And last but not least, his arms and his legs as sight of brass shining. So there it is. So in Daniel chapter 10, verse 6, the ISV basically says, his body was like beryl, literally Tarshish, a yellow semi-precious stone named after its region of origin. His face flashed like lightning. His eyes were like flaming torches. His arms and legs like polished bronze. His speech roared. The Hebrew is lax roared, like that of a crowd. So you can already see that, the emphasis is not skin color. The emphasis is shining, to shine. He shined like the sun. That's what you're getting from all these verses. Now, when you look up this word, about the burnished bronze and things like that, fine brass. When you look up that word, you have this combination of the word chakos and Libanos, and it's chako Liban or Lebanon. That's what you have in the Greek in the book of Revelation. It says that basically that means, according to the ELEPS or the Tastra Center for Bible, and computer, it basically says in the implied mean of whiteness or brilliancy, having a brilliant luster. Why does it say whiteness? Because whiteness is not in context of skin color. Whiteness is in context of all the lightning and shining and like the burning brass. That's what that context is. Notice that there is Greek. It says some metal like gold, if not more precious, in the implied mean of whiteness or brilliancy. Once again, what is that whiteness in reference to? The same things that Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 7, Daniel chapter 10 verse 6, and Revelation chapter 1 verses 15 and 16 been saying all along. Fine brass that burns, that glows hot in a furnace. His face was like lightning. His face shone like the sun, just like John the Revelator had saw when he ended up seeing Jesus transfigured. You can look at the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance Enhanced. It says the same thing. In the implied mean of whiteness or brilliancy, burnished copper, an alloy of copper or gold, and silver having a brilliant luster. Look at the Mount's Concise Greek English Dictionary of the New Testament. It says orichalcum. And once again, orichalcum is another word that you'll actually kind of find popping up in different places as well. Fine bronze, a factitious metal of which there were several varieties, the white being of the highest repute, or deep tinted frankincense. Wasn't Jesus brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh at his birth? It's funny that he was actually brought these glorified elements at his birth. Let's move on from this Chaco-Lebanon word. If you have the Modern Literal Translation and Concordance Dictionary and Lexicon of 2017, it basically says polished brass, shiny metal alloy. Notice that the shining is not about skin. The shining is about metal, right? It's describing what Jesus looks like. It's describing his body having these kind of celestial elements. Then all of a sudden you can look at certain commentaries and they'll actually tell you what this is kind of referring to. Now, certain commentaries kind of lean toward what the words mean in terms of the color of these bronze things. And all of a sudden it kind of leans also to the more spiritual meanings of the text. So, for example, you have the preacher's commentary. It means which glows with whiteness in the furnace. Another one says it looked like bronze glowing in the reflection of a fire. It's probably an allusion to his purity as he moves through the churches. So notice that his emphasis is not on the skin color, but to his attributes of how he moves through the churches. His feet which contact the earth, and under which all things are put, were as fine brass glowing in a furnace, just as once the fine brass of the altar glowed beneath the fire of the sacrifices. Sacrifices on top, glowing and all that fiery stuff on the bottom. That's what it's probably signifying if you're in a Jewish mindset. So their thoughts were not anything about skin color, but it always reminded them about something about the sacrifices that they did every year. And look, fine brass, Chaco Labano, derived by some from the Greek brass, frankincense, by Bocart, he's a guy that he's referencing, from brass, and Hebrew, Liban, to whiten. What is the Hebrew word for white? Laban. Who was Jacob's uncle? Laban. Having in the furnace reached a white heat, so burnished, glowing brass. Oh, look at that. Ezekiel 1:7, and of course, Revelation 10:1. That's another one. Translate. That basically is glowing brass as if they had been made red hot in a furnace. The feet of the priests were bare in ministering in the sanctuary. So our great high priest. That's Jesus. I'm not going to read all these, but you actually get to see even more of this. So the latter being borrowed from the Hebrew name, which comes from the root word meaning white. Perhaps the real meaning is white brass, i.e. the Latin word auricalcum. Looks like we're running in that to that Latin word again. You have other places where it says compared to Daniel chapter 10 verse 6. We've already done that. And his arms and his feet were like in the color to polished brass. You can see also another place that we already referenced, Ezekiel 1:7. And they, the feet of the living creatures, sparkled like the color of burnished brass, right? The word used there is once again Chaco Libano, and it already shows you what it means. Look at this. They even show you that it is actually a hybrid word. The most trustworthy authors inclined to take it as a hybrid word, half Greek, half Hebrew. Chalkos, brass, and Laban, white, to whiten, and understand it to signify brass which has attained in the furnace a white heat. There it is. So such technical words were likely enough to be current in a population that like of Ephesus. And this goes on to show that a lot of those people that were in Ephesus and who were the workers of metal, they said some of those people were Jews, no doubt. So the way that John is actually describing this stuff, the Jews who were metal workers in Ephesus would have picked up on this right away. Here's a mosaic of Jesus, but guess what? The early church didn't draw Jesus in his final glorified form. No, they just drew him as a humble man, right? It says a mosaic of Jesus from a church in Rome dating around 530 AD, recognizing that Jesus was probably dark-skinned and dark-haired. Now, me, obviously, I've always believed that Jesus was black. This is how, the Church of Rome described Jesus. This is how they depicted him on their ceilings. So notice that however John is describing Jesus, he's not describing Jesus in his earthly form. No, he's describing Jesus in his heavenly form. But the church, they still decided to depict Jesus in his earthly form as he walked and did miracles and healed the sick and he raised the dead. This is the Jesus that they seen for the most part. This is a Jesus that everyone remembers. So am I saying that I believe Jesus is not black? No, of course, I've always believed Jesus is black. What I'm saying is that when John is describing Jesus in his glorified form, what I'm saying to the Hebrews is that you're missing Jesus in his glorified form because you're so fixed on loving the fact that Jesus is a man of color. So much so that you actually miss Jesus in his glorified form, which has nothing to do with color or race. If you want to find a historic color of Jesus, just look in church history. If you want to know Jesus in his glorified form, read your Bible. Read what Jesus revealed to John. It says in the Bible that John was, quote unquote, the one who Jesus loved, right? He's probably almost like a son to Jesus. Now today, We got Black Hebrew Israelites that like to go ahead and take the image of Jesus and kind of make it into their own. So you're probably wondering, why in the world am I showing Bishop Nathaniel here? Well, a lot of former members and members will tell you actually that the way that they actually draw and depict Jesus is actually from a hybrid version of all the faces of the people in their leadership. So my question to you is, if you're specifically in the IUIC, when you have this image here, who are you worshiping? Are you worshiping God, or are you worshiping your leaders? It's really something you have to pay attention to. And not only that, why is it that the early Christians barely even drew the glorified Jesus? They just end up drawing regular, humble Jesus. But yet, these guys are fixed on drawing this kind of end time Jesus because it shows him coming and punishing and making things new again, and getting down, getting dirty. They like that Jesus, the warrior Jesus, right? Why? Because it reflects their leaders. But meanwhile, Jesus did not come to earth like that. Now he's coming back to earth in a very different way, but for now, this is the way that we are to be in the earth. This is the reason why Matthew 25, tests us all. Now, I know I'm getting a little off topic, so I'm going to go ahead and stop. But the bottom line is, the Bible shows John describing Jesus in his glorified, immortal, and incorruptible state. To reduce this precious description down to racial features is idolatrous and blocks the glory of God, putting your racial features as a central focus, and no longer the resurrection power of Jesus. Your focus should be the God of Genesis, not the God of genes. So that's pretty much it about this whole notion of what the book of Revelation actually describes. When it comes to the race of Jesus and the color of Jesus, you don't look to your Bible to show that. It always emphasizes the glorified resurrection power of Christ, right? That's what its emphasis was. If you want to look for Jesus' color, look in church history. But then again, his color is not what saves you. His color does not show any kind of power that he has. It doesn't do that. That's all I really wanted to say. And so I really hope that this at least, if you're a Hebrew Israelite out there, I hope this at least is very eye-opening for you. And talk to your leaders about this. Actually challenge them, talk to them, sit them down and say, hey, listen, the New Testament is written in Greek. The book of Revelation is written in Greek, and they're using these words this way, and this is what it means. And it has all these parallels to the books of Ezekiel and Daniel. And it also paraphrases certain ways about how the transfiguration of Jesus actually has a similarity parallel to this as well. Talk to them about it. Don't get cheated out of the glory of Christ for trying to find his race. You miss everything. Other than that, that's all I pretty much had to say. Raquel, if you wanted to say anything at all, feel free to before I end up closing this up. If you have anything that you want to add, you're free to add anything you like, if you have anything.
Yes, Brother Cyril, can you hear me?
Yeah, you good.
I just wanted to add something really quickly. I'm not going to dive too deep into it. I can save it for another time. But I do just want to point out for anyone that's not mindful about Song of Solomon, chapter 1. I find that a lot of people are trying to use this to describe the actual skin color of the Israelites, normally not realizing that the whole book of the Song of Songs is a dialogue between King Solomon and a Shulamite bride. Just to point out, when you're reading, be mindful, specifically chapter 1, verse 5 and 6. But just to be mindful that when you're reading chapter 1, the verses 1 through 7 actually have the Shulamite bride speaking. Solomon himself does not start speaking until verse 8. So whenever you're reading that, just be mindful of it so that you realize that verses 1 through 7 are not speaking about Israelites, Jews, Solomon at all. It's the Shulamite bride speaking. And you can also be sure to look up your words to see what they're really saying. An example would be like the word, I think it's translated dark in most translations, but it's 7838 Shakor, I think is how you pronounce it in the Strongs. That word is the only one that you would be able to use to try to describe skin color because it's an adjective. Although every other occurrence in the Bible is describing hair. Like I said, it's the only one that I can find throughout this whole entire Song of Songs that could be used to describe skin color. And again, it's applied to the Shulamite bride and not to Solomon. So just be mindful of that. And that's all I wanted to add, Brother Surreal. If there's anything else you want to.
Wow. Thank you. Awesome. I'll definitely keep that in mind, and I'll also go ahead and try to do some research more on the Shulamites. That's something I like to kind of dig deep into myself. So thank you for showing me that, sis. I really appreciate it. Other than that, that's it. This is Masali So Real and Raquel of the Shield Squad, and we are out. We'll see you guys. God bless.